What is your favorite, very creepy fact? Story 1. I saw a news story on a woman with a rare type of epilepsy that causes her to see everything like a slideshow or a video game that gets 10 frames per second. She described watching cars drive by and saying they freeze in place for a moment and then snap into position further down the road over and over. Her entire life is played out in front of her eyes in still frames, and because of that, she wears blinders or earmuffs because her senses are constantly contradicting one another, and it overwhelms her. I can't imagine how horrifying it would be to experience life like she does. Story 2. Indian followers of Zoroastrianism don't bury or burn their dead. Instead, they leave the bodies in special towers, exposed to the elements to be eaten by vultures. Unfortunately, the vultures are now endangered, leaving the bodies to slowly rot. Story 3. Cotard's delusion is a rare psychiatric condition, severe cases of which cause the sufferer to wholeheartedly believe they are dead, putrefying, or simply do not exist. Some Cotard's patients even refuse to eat, as they do not believe they need to, with one notable patient dying of starvation. Another woman once asked to be taken to a morgue to be with the other dead people. Story 4. The children's story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin was based on a real event. Hamelin town records start with this event. The earliest written record is from the town chronicles in an entry from 1384, which states, "It is 100 years since our children left. No one knows what or who took the children, but there's records of the entire town's children being taken." I actually did some research into this. Historians believe the children were not taken as kidnapped. No mysterious man grabbed all the children and took off. Instead, an illness probably spread, which mostly impacted children, who have a weaker immune system and are not as strong. The illness probably killed most, if not all, of the children. Story 5. Scaphism, the worst way of execution I've ever heard of. The word comes from Greek, which stands for hollowed out. The victim is trapped between two boats, fed and covered with milk and honey, which then attracts all kinds of insects and vermin that fester and devours you over a couple of days. I once visited Warwick Castle, and I remember looking at an oubliette in the corner of the dungeon. It was nicknamed the Forgotten Chamber, if I recall right. They would open the gate, push the person inside this small L-shaped space that was so small you would basically always be sitting down with your shoulders and arms scraping against the walls on either side. Then they'd close the grate and leave you there. You'd literally be forgotten about and left there until you eventually went insane and died from malnutrition in this tiny, claustrophobic, silent space in the dark. The thought of it scared me to death. The idea of being left to starve to death in this tiny space under the ground. Story 6. In 1844, there was a case of hysteria in a French convent of nuns. One started meowing, and after a week, all the nuns were meowing harmoniously in the afternoons. It didn't stop until neighbors called soldiers. Story 7. The island of Okunoshima in the inland sea of Japan is known for two reputable things. 1. It's named Rabbit Island because of the overabundance of wild rabbits, and 2. The island has World War II ruins of a chemical weapons factory, creating poison like mustard gas in its attacks on China. So vital was its secrecy to the Japanese government that they tried to wipe its location off of maps. Story 8. The bodies of the sailors who died on the Edmund Fitzgerald are still down there, almost perfectly preserved, due to the water at that depth being just barely above freezing. Divers who have explored the wreckage have seen their bodies frozen in place to parts of the ship, and have come back reporting that they feel as if they were being followed during their time underwater. Photos were taken, but per request of the crew's family, they have never been released to the public. Story 9. Somewhat recently, 2012, scientists discovered over 1,400 new species of bacteria living in the belly button. Everyone's belly button ecology is unique. Add it to the fingerprints and snowflakes list. In that same study, one volunteer belly button harbored bacteria strains that had only ever been found in soil from Japan, where this man has never been. Story 10. When your organs are taken out of your body for abdominal surgery, they don't get placed back in carefully or specifically. You just put all the organs back in, and the body sorts itself out. On top of that, some people are born with a condition called situs inversus, in which all their organs are a mirror image of what is normal. Having this automatically disqualifies you from being in the military. Story 11. While most parents do what they can to prevent or stop their babies from crying, that's not always the case in Japan. That's because it's a 400-year-old Japanese tradition that if a sumo wrestler can make your baby cry, it means he or she will live a healthy life. During a special ceremony, parents hand over their infants to sumo wrestlers, who bounce their precious tots up and down and sometimes even roar in their little faces to get the tears flowing. He's not a baby that cries much, but today he cried a lot for us, and we are very happy about it, one mother said at a 2014 event. Story 12. Abraham Lincoln's personal guard went out for a drink a few hours before his assassination. He met a man there that was extremely jittery. The man was famed actor John Wilkes Booth. Eyewitnesses said Booth was tense and wasn't sure he could do it. Nobody knew what he was going to do, but because he was such a famous actor, people helped him calm his nerves. The personal guard and Booth had a few drinks together and soon left for the theater. Later that same night, Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln while the personal guard was there on duty. Story 13. Female mummies in ancient Egypt were always more decomposed than their male counterparts. They discovered that this was because the male bodies were embalmed a lot sooner than female bodies. Female bodies were kept at the family home until they started to decompose, in order to avoid necrophilia at the embalmers. Story 14. While filming the movie The Exorcist, many actors got injured. The set burned down. A priest was brought in several times to bless the set, and the actor who played Burke, Jack McGowan, died of influenza. Just so you guys know, The Exorcist, a supernatural horror film directed by William Friedkin, was based on the 1971 novel of the same name by William Peter Blatty, which was in turn inspired by the exorcism case of Roland Doe, a pseudonym given to the victim by the Catholic Church. The 1973 film portrays the demonic possession of a 12-year-old girl. The story revolves around how the mother of the child attempts to seek normalcy in her daughter's life, with the help of two priests who conduct exorcism. From its onset, the film went through troubled waters. Prestigious directors not only turned down the film, but ominous events surrounded the year-long shoot. Nearly 9 people died who were associated with the production of the film, and a mysterious fire destroyed the set one weekend. People started to believe that the project itself was cursed. A priest was brought in several times on the set to bless the film, its actors, and the project. However, as if all the tragedies during the filmmaking process were not enough, just after the work was wrapped up, the actor who played Burke in the film died of influenza. Story 15. The RMS Titanic's sister ship, the HMHS Britannic, hit a mine and sank. The captain decided to hold the lowering of the lifeboats and tried to beach the ship on nearby Kia Island. He eventually ordered for the lifeboats to be lowered and stop the ship's engines. However, before the order was given, a couple of lifeboats were launched while the ship was still moving. Some of these lifeboats on the port side moved towards the propellers, and what resulted was a bit of a blender situation, ultimately ending 30 people. This is a very basic description of what happened, so I'm sorry if any of this is wrong. Story 16. If the heat death of the universe turns out to be correct trillions of years from now, then it will reach a point of absolute entropy, and time as we understand it will have no meaning. On a long enough timeline, once stars stop forming because gas and dust particles become too rare or scattered to form a sufficient mass to produce fusion, the existing stars will slowly, gradually exit their main sequence and become red/hypergiants, then collapse to dwarf stars. Eventually, even the dwarfs, the faintest light in the universe, will blink out. Their matter consumed by black holes. Many trillions of years of Hawking radiation will bleed away even the black holes, until everything reaches a state of unending changelessness. No physical processes will exist to mark the difference between one moment to the next. No biological or chemical reactions, no atoms and no movement and no light. Time as a linear concept will not exist because nothing will exist that could justify the presence or effects of time. Story 17. That butterflies are attracted to sweat, blood, and dead things. Don't be frightened and or swat them away. It's called puddling, and they're doing it to get salts and amino acids, nutrients that they wouldn't get from flowers. You'll be quite delighted to know this happens mostly during mating season. So, if a butterfly lands on you, it's because you're an aphrodisiac, and their version of Viagra. Enjoy the butterfly kisses. Story 18. Botflies. The very fact that they exist is more than creepy. See, these little bastards are parasitic. By that, I mean they bite an animal or human to inflict an open wound and proceed to inject their eggs into the wound. The larvae that hatch feed on the host while the host is alive, until they mature enough to fly and continue the circle. Oh, and there's usually multiple larvae at a time that leave craters in the host's body. Story 19. This couple went on a walk in the woods at night and stepped on something weird, kind of like skin. They heard a rustle in the bushes and left. A couple years later, they were watching the arrest of Ted Bundy and confessions. He said the time he got closest to getting caught is right after he somebody in the woods, when a couple stepped on the body. Story 20. That poking around with a vacuum energy at the subatomic scale could knock the current state of equilibrium down to a lower energy different equilibrium, thus creating a bubble of space-time, operating under different laws of physics, expanding at the speed of light, effectively deleting the universe we know as it passes. Story 21. Spiders don't have leg muscles, in the traditional sense. While humans have two muscles for each limb, one to extend and one to retract, spiders only have one for each leg that they use to retract. To extend their leg, they have to fill it with their body fluid, like a pneumatic pump. That's why their legs curl up when they die. Their muscles stiffen and retract, and there's no spider juice to counter this. Story 22. The CIA only classified one book ever, The Adam and Eve Story. In it, it presents the idea that the magnetic poles of the Earth have shifted on a fairly regular cycle, causing global catastrophes such as continental drift. I can't recall who, but somebody well known and deeply involved with the CIA published a book presenting a similar theory. Charles Hapgood, but with intentionally flawed science to completely discredit the idea. The magnetic poles are now moving at an astonishing and accelerating rate, and scientists don't know why. In the past 20 years, the poles shifted further than they did in the previous 150. That's not the only claim of the book, but the creepiest one to me. The book claims that humanity has risen and fallen numerous times. Story 23. Sleep paralysis. Sorry if it doesn't fit this question exactly, but the fact that someone can experience sleep paralysis and be completely aware of their surroundings and not be able to do anything about it, and be terrified, it's super creepy to me. Story 24. There is an area in your brain that deals with language cognition that, if damaged or otherwise affected, impairs your ability to understand other people's speech. This is called Wernicke's aphasia. As far as I understand it, you are effectively trapped in your own mind. As others try to communicate to you, you perceive it as absolute gibberish. You can understand yourself and convey your thoughts just fine. I don't remember if they actually are able to speak or are simply able to understand their own gibberish. But you can never comprehend what others try to say to you. Story 25. Some scientists think that the Higgs boson field might not be at its lowest energy level, and as such, we are in a false vacuum. Think of a ball stuck midway from the top of a mountain and the valley below. Stuck because there is a small climb it can't make. Due to an event such as quantum tunneling, the field could collapse, as the example above. Think the ball just passes through the ground and then continues to roll down the mountain. That would make a bubble of true vacuum that will destroy anything it touches, from atoms to black holes to galaxies, because the laws of physics are completely different there, and there is no way to detect in time because it travels at the speed of light. On the plus side, it might not be a universal scale event, but rather a local one, relatively speaking. As such, if it happened far enough and the expansion of the universe reaches FTL, then those baubles of insta-death would never reach us. Story 26. Scientists still don't know what purpose sleep has for our physical health. However, if you are deprived of it, within a few days you start to hallucinate, and your organs start to shut down. In under 2 weeks, it can be deadly. It's completely essential for survival. We spend a third of our lives doing it, and no one really knows why. Story 27. During World War II, a U.S. airman crashed on an island called Chichijima. He was captured by the Japanese and was taken prisoner and found himself with a few other airmen who got shot down over the island. And he said that some were missing limbs, and it had looked like they were surgically amputated. Later that day, there was a party that was held for the Japanese officers, and they were serving meat they called kimo, meaning fresh flesh. Turns out the Japanese were POWs and cannibalized them. One of the airmen who was shot down escaped by rowing out to a submarine that was scouting the area and told the crew that the Japanese on the island were eating people. When they took the island, they found some of the bodies stripped clean to the bone. Some of the POWs who were still alive had limbs missing, as they were cut off because some of the Japanese had grown fond of specific parts of the human body. The airman who escaped was George Bush Sr. Yeah, one of our former presidents almost got eaten by cannibal Japanese soldiers. Story 28. I know I'm late to this party, but in the Second Punic War, the Roman legions used to counter the Carthaginian war elephants by dousing pigs in oil or tar, then setting them alight. The pigs would begin to race in a panic in every which way. These pigs would be screaming in agony from being cooked alive, and these screams, combined with the flames burning on several dozen swine, would upset the elephants and cause them to either run amok or turn to flee and trample their own troops in the process. This is where the term war pigs comes from. Story 29. Some plants are phototoxic, meaning that you will only react to it if you're in the sunlight after handling the plant. It damages the skin, almost like a burn. Some are mild, while others can do serious damage. The majority of plants with these types of toxins are in the parsley family, including the most dangerous one, giant hogweed. Some citrus can also cause it. Story 30. Not in fact I know, but there was once this couple who tried experimenting with digital devices. They would talk about dog food for a couple minutes at a time, and even though they didn't have a dog, they began getting tons of ads for dog supplies. Similar things have happened to my family. It could simply be confirmation bias, but it could be something else. Story 31. Capgras delusion is where someone will stop recognizing one or a few people in their lives, and will usually believe the person who is presented in front of them is a copy, but will not recognize that person at all. They tend to be concerned about their replacement, but have been known to attack the replaced person. The other person is usually someone very important to them, such as a spouse, parent, or child. It's most commonly due to schizophrenia or dementia, but sadly can happen with a brain injury, frontal lobe. I would find it terribly creepy and heartbreaking for my husband to not recognize me and our child and claim that we weren't real. Story 32. Apologies if I'm late to the party and this has already been shared, but empty nose syndrome, a condition where, and I'm lamenting this, nasal passages feel blocked, dry, and painful, and it causes breathing difficulties. It can be caused by routine surgery, but in some people, its cause is unknown, as inspection of the nasal passages show they are perfectly fine. It could be a nerve damage issue, or it could be psychosomatic, and that causes a lot of nose doctors to dismiss it. There's not much treatment, none very successful, and there's not much recognition, and far too many people kill themselves to escape the symptoms. Can't imagine living a life where you constantly feel like you're suffocating. Story 33. If you have a fear of holes, be warned. The fly that a mango worm grows up to be will lay its eggs in an area a dog tends to sleep, and while it sleeps, the worms burrow into the dog's flesh. Hair around the area often falls out. It swells up and is intensely painful. To give you an idea of what it feels like for the dog, imagine cutting an inch deep into your gut. Then take a small object and lodge it inside the hole to keep it from healing. Then leave it in for weeks. Mango worms often cause nasty infections too, due to the open wounds they face. The only way to get rid of them is to squeeze the swollen, painful flesh to make the worms pop out. Story 34. It's not really my favorite, but it is creepy. When I was a kid in the 80s, my single mom would head for the bars on Friday and Saturday nights. She'd leave me home alone, in charge of my younger sister. I was 11 at that time, my sister 7. On several of these nights, I received a series of phone calls from a strange man. What he said terrified me. There was evil in that voice, and a fear like none other washed over me. That feeling is still there today, but the words are not. The only chilling detail I can recall is this. He claimed to know my mother was not at home, and I was alone. Story 35. Because of entropy, it's possible that the Higgs field, the thing that is responsible for mass, could reach a lower state of energy, and everything would be consumed faster than the speed of light, into a void of nothingness, where the laws of physics don't apply, and matter is impossible.